Maybe it'll be stepdaughter.
Test. Hey everyone. Oh yeah, it's on. Hey everybody, you guys are a timely crowd. Good for you. I mean, well done. I'm really. So a few of you are turning over a new leaf, maybe, but most of you, I think you just had good habits and never developed bad ones. So thank you all for being here this morning. You may notice that I am not Kurt. Kurt is going to be teaching a class on Ephesians in here, but he was not well, and so I'm covering for him. I'm not teaching on Ephesians because I don't want to. I'm going to let him do his thing. So I am a little, excited may not be the word. This is a class I had to put together Saturday at the last moment, and it is not planned out as well. But I kind of always wanted to see, can I do that? Can I just go in and teach a class? Which I got some notes. I've put some stuff together, but it will be different for me, so please bear with me. Also, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about is going to be connected with the main sermon. Anyway, buckle up and get ready to maybe hear some things twice in the sermon, but I think it's not going to overlap too much. I'm going to say a prayer for us, and we will begin. So let's all bow and pray together. Father God, you are so good, and we thank you for your word. We thank you for this community. We thank you for a safe place to worship. We do know a lot of people right now are sick, so I pray that you help Kurt to get well soon. And I just know there's a lot going on. There's physical illness, and then there's just some people in our church who just seem like Satan's attacking them. And so I pray for physical healing for many of us, but also spiritual healing. Father, thank you for being our God. Thank you for coming to earth in the flesh. And may we follow in your footsteps and be the people you want us to be. It's in your name we pray. Amen. As you guys can see on here, it is Transfiguration Sunday. Looks like you all dressed appropriately for it. Good job, everybody. In a lot of the Christian world, that's what they're doing right now. The fifth Sunday of Epiphany, and kind of the almost moving into Lent season. Like a lot of churches that follow a lectionary, follow a church calendar. They're celebrating the Transfiguration today. So like the Church of the Heavenly Rest, the Lutheran Church up the road, the Catholic Church, they're all talking about Transfiguration today, which is a fun one, because I really feel like, do y'all feel like in the Churches of Christ we talk about it as much? Yeah, it's one that kind of was lost on me, and then I mentioned it to a friend last night that was, it was Raymond's daughter, and she said like, oh yeah, the Transfiguration, that's a weird one. It is something we don't touch on as much, but anyway, that's because it's Transfiguration Sunday. That's actually what I'm talking about in the sermon. But there's these words spoken at the Transfiguration that we hear earlier in the Gospels, or something very close to something we hear earlier in the Gospels. What is that other moment in the Gospels where you hear these same words spoken at the Transfiguration? Anybody remember? Yeah, the baptism of Jesus. So in both times, the Transfiguration and the baptism of Jesus, both times, there's this voice from heaven that says these things about Jesus. Anybody remember what's said about him? This is my beloved son with whom I'm well pleased. That's said at the baptism. And there's different, if you look at the Gospels, there's different variations. At the Transfiguration, I think in every Matthew, Mark, and Luke, there's some words that are added that aren't said at the baptism. Anybody remember what those words, the added words are? Yeah, listen to him. Listen to him is said at the Transfiguration. And when it says listen to him, that's like saying follow him, obey him. He has the words of life. And so what I want to do is I want to really do a little bit of comparison with some of these words and maybe talk a little bit about the baptism and what happens there. So I pulled up the baptism, words of the baptism of Jesus in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, even though John's kind of just honorable mention. We'll look at that. There's something different happening in John. But I'd like for us to read all these. So can someone pull up Mark 1? Just raise your hand and we'll come back to you. Anybody want to call Mark to read to the class? All right, thank you, CJ. All right, who's got Matthew? Okay, Raymond's got Matthew. You want one? And then Larry, you want John? Okay, so while they're going there, while they're pulling these texts up, and we'll hear them all read, a few questions, though. Who is someone, we maybe don't want to use names or look at them, who is the type of person that you love but don't always like? You got anybody like that? Someone you love but don't really like? Okay, I don't want to use names, but Michelle just pointed at her husband. Sometimes spouses, you do feel that way. I've committed to you, but you're driving me nuts right now. In this moment, I do not like you. Anybody else, you ever think of any other relationships like that? People you love but don't always like? Kids. Yes, siblings is the first one I thought of. Ouch. That's fair. And it's a lot of family, right? Sometimes family, you just feel that way, like you're here, you're in my life, I'm totally committed to you, but sometimes you drive me nuts. Okay, so what about, siblings, I thought of that. Kids, you feel mean saying that about your kids, but I could see how my dad would feel that about my siblings, so I'm okay with that. Okay, and then think of the opposite. What type of relationships is it where you like this person, but you don't feel like you totally love them? And I mean, okay, I get it. As Christians, we're supposed to love everybody. But what are those relationships where you like them, but you don't love them? Yeah, like acquaintance type relationships, right? Like this person seems really cool, but I don't have this deep connected relationship with them. Coworkers. And I think I ask these just to kind of, sometimes we confuse the words like and love. They have two different meanings. And if you said to this person, I love you, it would be kind of weird. Okay, yeah, no, this is a good example. Which leads me to another thing is the word love. We use in different ways, right? Sometimes we even overuse the word love where the meaning changes a little bit. Like, I love my wife. I also love buffalo wings. You know, like those are two different kinds of love, right? That's an overuse of the word in a way. And we should, like I say, when we're talking about people you love but don't always like, CJ said preachers. It is a funny thing that we do a lot of times. When we ask ourselves questions like these, we need to also turn those questions back on ourselves like that. Are there people that probably love me but don't like me? Is there times when I am off-putting? Is there, because I think a lot of times, I've noticed this as a preacher, is you preach a message, and a lot of times people don't hear that message for themselves. They hear it from Manny. And they're like, yeah, Manny really needed to hear that one. But it's like, no, wait a second. You need to hear, hey, what's up, Manny? And so it is always good to ask, whenever you think about any of these things, or whenever you're thinking something critical about someone, you always need to think, well, could I say that about me too? We're a lot quicker to evaluate other people and a lot slower to evaluate ourselves. But anyway, all that to say, I want that in the back of your mind, the difference between being liked and being loved. Okay, so let's look at some of these. And since John is kind of the honorable mention, let's just do that one first. Who's got John? Larry? Thank you, Larry. Yeah, so an interesting one, and I say more honorable mention because it tells the story a little bit differently, and there's not the baptism of Jesus there. It's implied, but it's not explicit. All the other ones, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it clearly happens, but that's just kind of a reference to it. And John's weird like that in a few ways. They think John was probably a later, like written later than the other Gospels. And it's kind of weird that he leaves out the baptism. And there's a couple of reasons why people think that. One, and I think this is pretty interesting, is a lot of people thought John the Baptist was the Messiah. And you can see him kind of denying that in a lot of the Gospels. He says, and even in the text that Larry read, it's saying like, "Hey, I'm not worthy to untie this guy's sandals. This guy's bigger and better than me." But there's people think that perhaps John, that because John the Baptist baptized Jesus, it appeared as though John the Baptist was somehow superior to him. That Jesus was a disciple of John the Baptist, and so the text want to make really clear, no, he's not a disciple. And John the Baptist wanted to make really clear, no, this guy is above me. And so there may have been John the Baptist followers during this time when John was written who were still kind of touting, well, he was a disciple of, Jesus was a disciple of John the Baptist. And so they may have just left it out completely because of that. Could also have left it out if you read John, if you remember, John's way different than Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Sometimes I like to think of John as he probably knew the other Gospels. He probably had read them, was aware of at least some of them, and maybe was giving us some of the stuff that they felt like was left out. Hey, here's some other cool things that these other guys left out. Also, something just weird is the sacraments. I know we don't use that term very often, and John are kind of cloaked. In the churches of Christ, we have two, we don't use the word, but there are two sacraments in the churches of Christ. What are those? Okay, yeah, so by sacrament, I mean a physical thing we do on earth with a heavenly meaning. So yeah, communion, the Lord's Supper is one. What is the other sacrament? Yeah, baptism and communion. And there's kind of a cloaked, baptism's referenced a lot in John. But it's kind of cloaked. They don't explicitly, be talking about being born of water and spirit. And then the institution of the Lord's Supper does not happen in John. He washes the disciples' feet, but there's no institution of the Lord's Supper, but there's a nod to it. Anybody remember where the nod to it in John is? the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus talks about eat my flesh and drink my blood. So there's just a weird handling of the sacraments in John 2. So anyway, most of that's neither here nor there. These three, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they're going to have a pretty similar take on the baptism of Jesus. But there's something that we really need to compare here. So who's got Mark? All right, take it away, Siege. All right, thank you, CJ. Okay, so I got the words at the baptism of Jesus. Let's pay attention to the words being spoken to Jesus or to us. What are the voice from heaven saying? All right, who's got Matthew? All right, Raymond, go ahead. All right, thank you. Okay, what was the difference in the words spoken? Yeah, first person versus third person. So the first one, he's speaking to Jesus. You are my son, with whom I love. You I'm well pleased. And yeah, maybe second person. Yeah. And then in Matthew, so in Mark, he's speaking to him. Maybe that's an easier way to think about it. In Mark, he's speaking to him. In Matthew, the voice is speaking about him. Well, which one was it? Are we going to use the, are we going to take a vote? Is that how we'll figure it out? What does Luke say? Who's got Luke? Go ahead.
John was praying to the sky, the Holy Spirit came down on him. The Spirit looked like a real dove, and a voice came from heaven and said, "You are my son. I love you." Great.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so you got Mark and Luke, the voice is directly addressing Jesus. And then in Matthew, it's more about Jesus. And I'm not saying one's right or wrong necessarily. This is just how Matthew was probably trying to make maybe a different point. I don't know how much y'all have talked about how the Gospels work. What's the oldest gospel? What was the first gospel written? Anybody remember? Yeah, Mark was the first written. And most believe that Matthew and Luke used Mark as a source when they were writing. And Luke even talks about using sources. At the beginning, if you look at the opening of Luke, he talks about all these different sources. And so that's why these three, they're called the Synoptic Gospels. Sometimes they agree word for word. Sometimes they're real close. And then sometimes there's minor changes. Greek people will tell you that know Greek better than me. And you can actually see it in English translations too, that sometimes Matthew and Luke, they use Mark, but they correct some of his grammar. They word it a little better. But anyway, so Mark being the oldest one, sometimes you want to go with the oldest whenever you're trying to figure out what was the truest to the source. So Mark says, hey, it's God speaking directly to Jesus. Matthew probably rewords it that way to know that, hey, these are words spoken for us as well, not just for Jesus. But I think it's neat to think about. Were those words spoken at the baptism? Were they more for us? Or is there something personal that Jesus needed to hear in those words? Why would Jesus specifically need to hear those words? Yeah. Jesus was so human that he probably wondered sometimes. He experienced some of this unknown kind of stuff that we do. And specifically saying like, hey, this is my, what is the full phrase? Do you still have it pulled up? What is the full phrasing of the words in Mark? Yeah, that part, yeah. My son. I'm pleased with you. I think that was something he was really going to need to know. As he's going into this ministry where he's going to be rejected, Pharisees are going to butt heads with him. His family's going to reject him. His hometown is going to try to kill him. He probably, when you're going through and experiencing that stuff, when you're experiencing this kind of pushback on your ministry, you're going to wonder, am I doing what God wants? Is this really what God expected? Or am I totally off base? Am I messing up here? And so I think he did need that reassurance, like, no, you are doing the right thing. I really am pleased with you. I'm really pleased with who you are and what you're doing. Okay, yeah, great point. Yeah. And that's something that's also important for the onlookers, right? So one, it's speaking directly to Jesus. I am pleased with you. What you are doing is right. You are doing the right thing. And then the onlookers or people in the future who are going to read the stories of Jesus need to know, oh no, God approved of this. Yeah, he healed on the Sabbath, but God approved of him. There were some things he did that were edgy, but God still says, I'm pleased with him. But then, yeah, what he's getting to is that there is also the I love you part. That's something that Jesus probably needed. Jesus was so human that he needed that reassurance from his Father. I love you. And it's when we hear, and like he said, this one you need to hear more than one time, right? And Jesus gets to hear it from God more than one time. He hears it at the transfiguration, and he hears it at the baptism. So I think a lot of times when we read about the baptism and this voice from heaven, we think that voice is for us. But according to Mark and Luke, first and foremost, it was for Jesus. Jesus needed to hear those things. Jesus needed to know he was loved. Jesus needed that reassurance. But it's also important for us to hear it as well. Another, and this is getting further into speculation, but did Jesus always know he was about his connection with God? Did he always know he was the Son of God? Some people think that it was at the baptism where he realized, oh, this is my connection with God. What do you think, Dottie? Yeah, in the temple, he says, hey, I was in my Father's house. Some people think maybe that's when he knew. Some people think he may have just been speaking more generally about, well, God's my Father. But, yeah, I don't know. Maybe he always knew. Maybe he grew up being told that. I don't know. But either way, I think what's going on here, I think it's nice to think about these words as first for Jesus and then secondarily for us. Jesus needed that reassurance. One of the things that I realized as a youth minister, and I've even mentioned this to students before, is really the number one things teenagers are looking for. The number one thing they're looking for is acceptance. And I've mentioned this to students, and I've said, do you all agree with that? And they've all said, yeah, I agree. They want a place to belong. They want to know they are cared for. And I would actually say if you look at when high school kids, middle school kids get into trouble, usually behind that somewhere is they get into trouble or sin because in some way they want to be accepted. They're looking for that acceptance. Maybe they're doing something bad for attention. Maybe they're drinking because that's what the cool kids are doing. Maybe they're posting stupid pictures of themselves because they want those likes. A lot of it is about, please accept me. And I would say adults still have somewhat of that mindset. We just hide it better. I think that's not at the top of our priority. Like if you said, what is most important to adults? We might say paying the bills or taking care of family. But somewhere down there, we still all, we have, adults have other worries. But that's still probably on the radar somewhere, is do I have a place where I belong? Do I have a community? Do I have friends? Am I a part? But having a place or a group where you are accepted is, I think we would all agree, is a basic human need, right? We all want that. I like to make reference to this every now and then. The Maslow's hierarchy of needs is some psychologists who kind of put together this pyramid of basic human needs. And you kind of have to have what's on the bottom level to get what's on the next one. And so, like, if you're you become a complete and whole person, according to this dude, when you have all of these. And I think it's a pretty cool thing to look at in light of faith. So first you need like physiological needs, food, water, warmth, rest, like the most basic things, safety needs, shelter. But then the next one you move into is belongingness and love needs, intimate relationships, friends. And then the next one, esteem needs, prestige, feeling of accomplishment, feeling like you're valuable. And then the last one, self-actualization, achieving one's full potential, which sometimes good mentors bring this out of you. They see the good things in you, the powerful things in you, and try to work to bring those out. But thinking about the words spoken at the baptism of Jesus, and again, thinking of these words as not so much for us, even though they were, but first and foremost, words spoken to Jesus, for Jesus. What needs here were those meeting? This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. How is it meeting that one? Belongingness and love needs. I mean, it's saying, I love you. You are, but what about esteem needs? You think it's meeting that one? Yeah, it's saying, I'm pleased with you. You're doing it right. And so it's really meeting two of these needs in Jesus. And remember, he was fully God, but he was also fully human. And he had these needs. And so I think these are like really important words spoken over Jesus by his Father. Very important human needs that we all need to hear. I think it's important. These are important words we want to hear from our dads, really. But I think we need to remember that a lot. Just the thing that Sheila was bringing up is this idea that just because my kingdom work I'm doing, when I'm trying to serve God, just because it's not getting the results that I had hoped for, does not mean that it's still not from God or that God doesn't approve of this ministry I'm part of. Just because your kingdom efforts aren't getting the results you want, it doesn't mean God doesn't approve of what you're doing. You might need to act like if a missionary is not having as much success as they thought they would have. If a youth minister's really been investing with this kid and they're not seeing the change yet, I think you do need to ask yourself, you do need to evaluate, hey, is there something I need to change? Is there something I'm doing wrong? But a lack of success does not necessarily mean, well, your heart's not in the right place, or you're not doing it right, or God's not pleased with you. Sometimes the world just pushes back. Sometimes people just reject what you're trying to do. So I think that's important to note. Just because my ministry or my missions or whatever I'm doing seems to not be having the success that I hope for, it doesn't mean God doesn't approve of it. But I think a lot of people, going back to this idea, because really what I feel like part of what Jesus is hearing, I love you, but he's also hearing, I also kind of like you. I also approve of you. And so thinking of those differences between being liked and being loved, sometimes in our world, sometimes, not all the time, I think people want to be liked more than they want to be loved. Do y'all agree with that? Have y'all ever seen cases of that where it seems like, yeah, Michelle? Oh, that's a good point. So yeah, love means you're so involved that you might say, hey, there's this thing that you're doing that I don't like. And I love you so much, I think that you should change that. And if you change that, your life would be better. But like is just saying, hey, good job, and then not getting involved. So love has more involvement. Is that kind of what you're, I think that's, I didn't put that in my notes, but I think that's good insight. Why else might we rather be liked than loved? Yeah. I think there can be a lot of answers to this. Dottie? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and that's for, I can be totally loved by my parents, but I also want to know I'm special. Like, yeah, you love, and I don't know, it's kind of a, I don't want to say it's not a right feeling to have, but it's like whenever I got two siblings, like, okay, my parents love both of my siblings too, but I kind of want to know I'm special. Is there something special about me that you like? And so I don't want to say being loved isn't enough, but I do think there are some kids, there are some people who are very secure in their parents' love. They're very secure in that, but they want to know there's something special about them too. They want to know there's something significant about them too that makes them liked. Y'all agree with that? Any other ways you see people in the world preferring to be liked over loved? Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's something in us that just says, like, I don't want, it's something human in us that says, I want to earn something. I get your unconditional love, but I also want to feel like in some way I've earned something. So maybe, I don't want to say it's a sinful drive, but there is something in us that says, no, I want there to be something special about me. I want there to be something significant. And I actually believe inherently everybody does have that. I believe everybody's got something special and significant about them. And it takes mentors and Christian community to help people see these things so that we can move the Christian community into this top one where they're really using their gifts and really plugging into the community and reaching their full potential in Christ of who God wants them to be. And so I think it's not totally bad to want to be liked also, as long as you're not putting too much of your value in that. Your value ultimately comes because you're a child created by the greatest artist in the universe. I've thought about any other ways you think about this? Any examples in culture or anything of people wanting to be liked more than loved? Barbara? Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. The likes on social media is it's approval without accountability. And that's what a lot of people want. Please just approve of me. It's also a mass approval that you can actually assign a number to your popularity. How unhealthy is that, right? Like, man, that is, ooh. But yeah, I thought of it too, is that's a place where we can receive this approval without the love that comes from an intimate relationship that comes with accountability. I remember one time my wife said in some of her teacher training that they tell the teachers, hey, tell the kids, I like you. Now, why would they tell you that in training, specifically to say I like you? Why is that valuable? Yeah. And maybe a lot of the kids, kind of like we were talking about, sometimes we almost overuse the word love, right? Like sometimes love, some kids have heard their love. I can actually think of an example. I won't give it, but there was someone who was telling me, yeah, this person was saying they loved me as they abused them, which is really, some people have not been loved well. And so some people, they've been kind of burnt out on the idea of love. Love hasn't been modeled in a way where that's even a good thing. But then on the other side of it, some kids are just told they're loved all the time, and they need to know, well, no, there's actually some things I like about you too. I don't just love you just blanket like I love everybody. There's something special about you that makes you likable. And I think training teachers to say these things is probably, we just had this whole series in the other class about mental health. That's probably actually a response to some of the mental health issues. It's like, hey, some of these kids need to grow up being told, hey, there's significant and special things about you that are likable. So I think that's a good thing to tell kids they are liked and tell them why. But at the heart of all of this is we want to know we are valuable. We want to be chosen. So it was good for Jesus to hear both, I love you, I am pleased with you, and I approve you. Good for Jesus as a human. The human side of him needed that. And I'd say in my ministry studies, in my education courses and counseling books, I think the two most important, and just an experience, the two most important things somebody needs to hear, and two things that we should be telling our kids and our spouses often. The two things that humans long to hear. I love you. I'm proud of you. I love you and I'm proud of you. And those are the words the voice from heaven says to Jesus. I love you. I mean, essentially, right? I chose you. I like you. I love you and I am proud of you. So I think these words were much more for him than for us. But the ministry you're about to see, Jesus, the ministry you're about to do, because the baptism is the beginning of the ministry. God approves of what you're doing. The moments where you're going to wonder, the moments where, and maybe for the disciples too, when they're looking on, when Jesus breaks Sabbath rules, they'll remember, oh yeah, but we know God approves of him. When he talks to the Samaritan woman at the well, when he recruits tax collectors, God is well pleased with him. This is, God approves of what he's doing. Have y'all noticed that some people have a really hard time? And so kind of this idea of God the Father speaking, loving, affirming, kind, complimentary words over Jesus. Have you noticed there are some people who, for whatever reason, and maybe we have some in here, it's a pretty common issue, I think, some people just can't say affirming words to people. And it's not always because they're totally bad people. But have you ever noticed some people have a really hard time saying, hey, good job, hey, I'm proud of you? Why do you think that is? So, are you defending yourself, Manny? So we are talking about Manny, just to be clear. Okay. It explains so much. Okay. Yeah. Just know through my actions that you're loved, and you're welcome. So a couple of reasons there that I hear is some people have a hard time speaking affirmation because they didn't grow up in a household where they were affirmed, where those things were said. Okay, why else? What else might be going on there when people just have a hard time saying these things? Do y'all know what I'm talking? Y'all know what I'm talking? Have y'all seen people who have a hard time with this? Okay, for some people, so Sheila said they tear up. I do think that for some people, it is a emotional, for lack of a better term, an emotional conversation, and some people can't have emotional conversations. Yeah, yeah. So I think that's fair. I think some people are like, well, this is a sensitive topic, and I have a hard time ever getting into that. Um, and I thought of other reasons. I think some people, they really are just harsh. They really are just like, well, if I give them any encouragement, then they'll think they've got it and they'll get lazy, and I can't have that. Like some coaches, right? You see coaches after a game where they had a big win, and Greg Popovich, he'll still sit there and talk about the 3 things that went bad and the things they need to work on. So sometimes it's that mindset. But yeah, I think some people, for whatever reason, they just have a really hard time speaking those encouraging words. Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, thinking of important values. So it's part of the takeaway today is for especially for parent, because I think of God and Jesus' parent-child relationship. We need to make sure that we are speaking affirmations over our kids. One, yes, I love you, but also I'm proud of you and I like you. But the things that we choose to say, here's what I like about you, here's why I'm proud of you, communicate values. And we need to be very careful about what values we communicate. I like you because you're pretty. Well, okay, that's nice, and we want to, beauty is a great thing, but we don't want to communicate that that's what's most important. Same thing with you mentioned like sports. I think we Brianna and I are pretty intentional about, I'm going to use ourselves as a good example. But with my kids, it's like, hey, it is so great that you medaled in this cross-country race. I'm so proud of you, but I'm really proud of you because I saw you group up the guys and pray with them beforehand. That's what's really special. Hey, you really are smart and you really excel at school, and I love that, but I'm really proud for the way my daughter's never too cool for any of the younger kids, and she can make them feel like a part. And it's like, dude, that's really special. Hey, the way you're being a friend to this friend in this really difficult moment, I'm proud of that. So you pick what you like and what you're proud of, and that communicates the values of who they want to be. Yeah, of speaking important words wisely over kids at big moments. Yeah, big milestone. Yeah, that's good. But yeah, I think I've been one, because I just see some people who they just cannot break that barrier into speaking affirming words over people. Yes. I think that's another difficult part of it. Some people who have a hard time speaking affirming words have a really hard time receiving them. Have you ever had that? Is it hard to receive a compliment? I think that's something, kind of a side note, I think that's something you need to work with your kids through sometimes. How to receive a compliment well. Because sometimes it's like, oh, shut up. Oh, that's not true. I think it's okay to receive a compliment. One phrase that I want to give to my kids that I think is it's a nice way that kind of gives the compliment back, is to just say, like, I'm honored that you would say that. I think that's a nice way to receive a compliment. It actually receives it. It actually, because it actually does feel good, but it says like, hey, coming from you, that actually means a lot. It means a lot that you would say this kind thing about me. So I do think that's another thing we need to work with our kids on. Really, I really think this is an important conversation to have, is if you know how to receive a compliment well, maybe you can actually give them better too. You can give those encouraging words well. We're out of time. Look at that. I didn't even get through all my notes that I threw together Saturday. I'm really becoming a preacher now. So those of you who came in a little bit late, I know I'm not Kurt Nickham. He was sick, so this was my fill-in class. He will be back next week and begin the class on Ephesians. But it was good conversation. Go and be people who speak loving and encouraging words and let people know not only why you love them, but why you like them. And happy Transfiguration Sunday.